Hello, folks. So I wanted to welcome you to the Halifax Town Hall. I'm Charlie Seelig, the town administrator. I'm hosting, I guess is the best way, of this event, which is a combination presentation and hearing about the total daily maximum load report from Monponsett Pond and some of the other ponds in the area. Very short introductions. I know two of our selectmen are here, Tim Roy and Troy Guerin, who have been working diligently for many years on the issues regarding Monponsett Pond. Also, State Representative Tom Colt is here. He's been invaluable in assisting us up at the state level, working with the other state agencies and providing funding. He's just been very, very helpful in our efforts to work on Monponsett Pond. So Kim is is here to introduce everybody else. It's not that Kim. We run into that problem at Town Hall sometimes also with multiple Kathys, I think is our main one. Then we got two Pams also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome. We're happy to be here. It's such a beautiful space, and it's great to see so many folks come out on this really chilly night. Shows that there's a lot of interest in this project. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Groff. I work for Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and I manage the Watershed Planning Program, which oversees TMDL development. And I'm joined by my colleagues from the Southeast region. So we have Dave Johnston right here, and John Hobel. Where's John? Oh, there's and then we also have from our office in Worcester, we have Barbara Kickham, who's the TMDL section chief, and then also Mark Mattson and Matt Reardon, who were the two technical lead folks on the project. So when the hard questions come out, they're going to be here to answer that. Before we get started, just want to make sure everybody signed the sheet. So we want to have a record of who was able to make it here today. And as we pointed out, we're here to talk about, and it's a mouthful, the total maximum daily load. We abbreviate that and say TMDL, so you'll probably hear those two terms used interchangeably. We're here to talk about the Monponsett Pond system, which includes both the east and west Monponsett Pond, but also Stetson Pond and White Oak Reservoir. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and what you can see in this photograph is a picture that was taken by Chief Ted Broderick back in 2015. And you can see it's very apparent by the photo that one of the ponds is green and one of the ponds is relatively clear. And so we're here to talk about the cause of that condition, which is excessive nutrients. And in this system, we're talking about phosphorus, because in freshwater systems, phosphorus is the cause, excessive phosphorus is the cause of the over-enrichment of the system. So basically what you see is an algae bloom, and that occurs because there's too much nutrient going into the system. And so we're going to get into a lot more detail about that, but I just want to provide that as a backdrop because it really, the picture sets the stage for why we're here.
You can advance with this left click button.
All right.
The other button.
This one? Oh. I've lost it here. Oh, go to slide.
Here, just
Next, right?
no, you don't have to do that one.
Okay.
Just hit.
Hit that, oh, that one. Okay. Thanks, Mark. So, so the most important thing about today is we want to hear from you. We want to get your comments, and we want to answer any questions that you have. So we're going to leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for that. I'm going to start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what a TMDL is, what a total maximum daily load is, and why we develop TMDLs. And then Matt's really going to get into the nuts and bolts of the technical analysis. So what was the basis for the analysis that created the TMDL? and then also talk specifically about what actions we need to put in place to address the TMDL. And then, of course, the questions and comments at the end. So a little bit of background on TMDLs. As we said, a total maximum daily load is basically a pollution budget. And what that means is it's the level of the pollutant that we need to bring into control in order to recover the system, so in order to restore water quality. And the TMDL is actually part of a larger set of programs under the Clean Water Act. So the TMDL is a federal requirement, and it's in the context of the Clean Water Act, which includes the development of standards. So out of the watershed planning program in Worcester, we develop water quality standards, and they allow us to set the limits for what is appropriate for the water body in order to maintain the uses. We also monitor, so we go out and we collect a lot of water quality samples and we analyze those samples and determine whether or not the water quality that we measure is at the standard or above the standard. And that is our assessment process. And basically, once we do the assessment, we determine, is the water body clean or is it dirty? If it's clean, we try to manage the water body to keep it clean. If it's dirty, we need to develop a TMDL or a pollution budget in order to clean that water body up. And so this is the scope of what we do. What John and DJ do is they work in the region and they work with permits and compliance and enforcement. And so while the TMDL isn't an enforcement document, it does drive the development of permits to control the system. So that's an important thing to understand. Also, you see this is a water wheel. So there are a lot of cycles that we've gone through in the state of Massachusetts, starting in the 70s and 80s with wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And now at the current time, most of the loads, especially related to phosphorus over enrichment or non-point source or septic or ag or stormwater runoff. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So, as I mentioned, my shop develops the standards, and in regards to nutrients, we have a narrative standard. And the narrative standard states that we cannot over-enrich the waters to the point where we don't meet their use goals. And so we have to protect those uses. And what we're talking about when we say uses is things that everybody here can relate to. So the water has to be safe to drink. Very important. These are all Class A waters and they have to be safe to drink. Secondly, they have to be suitable for primary and secondary contact recreation. So swimming, boating, kayaking. They also have to support the animals and fish and plants that live in the system. And so we call that aquatic life. They have to support aquatic life. And then also you have to be able to take the fish and consume the fish and not get sick from that. So we basically set standards to achieve those use goals in my unit. And for this particular project, we have a number of water quality targets. And the assumption is that if we can get to these targets, we'll be able to bring the system into compliance. And those targets are, we have a standard for dissolved oxygen, that's in our water quality standards. And we also have these indicators that we set targets for. So chlorophyll, that, if you remember the first slide that I showed you with the green lake, that's algae. So chlorophyll A has a target of 16 to control the algae. We also have to be able to see through the water, and that's to protect the swimming use. And that target is that you have to be able to see more than 1.2 meters. And then also we don't want to see the pond get choked with floating plants. And so we have a target of less than 25% cover. And then also a lot of you might be aware that there's been some algal blooms and sometimes harmful algal blooms. And so we have a target, which is part of the Mass Department of Public Health, that we don't want to see cyanobacteria levels get above 70,000. And that's because when the cells die, they release toxins, and they're toxic to humans and animals. And as I said, we have a narrative target, and so we use guidance when we start to look at cleaning up systems like this. And generally speaking, we want to see the concentration below 0.025 milligrams per liter of total phosphorus. And when I say generally speaking, Matt's going to get into this in a little bit more detail. We refine those targets for the ponds in this system based on their site-specific characteristics. So we've done some analysis to refine those targets, but generally speaking, they're going to have to get down to less than that target number. Okay, so a little bit more specifics. What is a TMDL? Total maximum daily load. It's basically a pollution budget. So it is the load that you need to get to in order to control the amount of phosphorus going into the system and restore the use goals. As I mentioned, it's not an enforcement document, it's not a permit, but it's a technical analysis that is the basis to drive permits. And so we may find that once this TMDL is established, some of the requirements in the TMDL may get translated into the MS4 permit. This is a numeric way to say what I just said. And essentially, we're going to get into a little bit more detail with this in Matt's talk. But how we calculate the TMDL is we look at the background level in the receiving water. And then once we identify the load, we have to parse it out into what is the source of that load. And we calculate both a waste load allocation, which is something that we use to develop permits, and a load allocation, which helps guide the management actions that we need to put in place in order to restore water quality. And then we also build in a margin of safety, and that's to account for any uncertainty in the modeling. And we have to also consider seasonal variability and growth. And I think that's my transition slide for Matt.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Reardon, and I'll tell you about the TMDL that we've developed. So we talked about what is the health of a water body, where is it, what are the standards we compare against to talk about. But I also want you to know it's pretty obvious, you can tell from the picture that there's major problems with this system in West Monponsett Pond. And I realize that it can be very frustrating for you, and our environment's impaired. So in order to study this area, we've looked at the different land uses in the watersheds to the different ponds. And the land uses influence how much phosphorus is going into the streams and ponds. So it's just a general overview of where we are. We have Stetson Pond in the northeast, and it flows into Stetson Brook and goes down into East Monponsett. You have White Oak Brook Reservoir in the northwest, and it flows to White Oak Brook down into West Monponsett Pond. And East Monponsett is connected to west, but a lot of the water from east goes to Silver Lake for that diversion. And another thing to notice in this area is you see there's a lot of cranberry bogs. You have Edgewood bogs up near Stetson Pond. You have the SMJ Associates in the East Monponsett watershed. And you have Mr. Duncan upstream of the old reservoir, the White Oak Brook Reservoir there, and the Morse brothers have a parcel below the reservoir. So that's just the general flow, and then I will talk about the ponds themselves. So the ponds' characteristics will influence their susceptibility to pollution and how they respond to nutrients. So the four major ponds, Stetson Pond is the deepest. Its maximum depth is around 32 feet. It's not very well flushed, and it is the clearest of the ponds. So that means that light will get down to the bottom and you can have more plants, and it's a little bit more susceptible to nutrients in Stetson. White Oak Brook Reservoir is very shallow. It's about 3 feet. It's a very small impoundment of White Oak Brook there. It's very well flushed. The water doesn't stay in the pond very long at all. So if nutrients are reduced from the watershed upstream of it, it'll respond fairly quickly to that. East Monponsett and West Monponsett are both pretty shallow too for ponds. East Monponsett's only about 6 feet deep, and West Monponsett is about 7 on average. Those east and west are fairly highly colored, or tea-colored, and I'll get into talking about why the color matters later when I talk about the targets to restore the ponds. So that's that. Okay, so to talk about these ponds, we need to know where they've been and what's influencing them. Stetson Pond, historically, wasn't always the cleanest. In the 1980s, the phosphorus levels were pretty high. In the 2000s, things started to get better, and the Edgewood bogs were discontinued. And recently, our sampling has found levels are fairly low. We like them a little bit lower than they are now. So that's Stetson. And this is just an example to talk about the phosphorus. In the 80s, it ranged from 30 to 90, which is quite high in parts per billion, which is similar to that 25 micrograms per liter we talked about earlier. And then in the 2000s, you can tell it's much lower, and it's right around our target, which I'll talk about later. So Stetson is the cleanest of the bunch. It had some occasional issues with algae in the 80s, and also in 2015 it was above our target of 16. We'd like the algae amounts measured by chlorophyll to be below 16. So we had some episodic issues with that. And our sampling has also found sometimes the oxygen in the depths will be low, and that's an issue. So that's Stetson. White Oak Brook Reservoir, we've sampled that from 2009 to 2015. It's very shallow, has lots of color, and you can see this picture here. There's a lot of duckweed coverage. That's a plant that we often find when there's a lot of this elevated phosphorus. So that coverage is, in this picture, is 100% of the pond, so that's much higher than the 25% we'd like to see. That's White Oak. East Monponsett, we've sampled it a number of years as well. Total phosphorus has usually been about 20 to 35 parts per billion. It's fairly clear, so our second disc goes pretty deep, and it's usually greater or right around the standard. But since 2011, the chlorophyll A levels have been elevated above what we'd like to see, with the exception of 2015, which was a very dry summer. So this is just a graph showing you the total phosphorus in parts per billion. You can just see it's pretty much always above our target, I'll talk about later, of 20. So that's a moderate level of phosphorus for that pond. And the chlorophyll A, you can just see in this graph in 2011, 12, and 13, it was elevated. So we also sample West Monponsett. That's the most impacted pond. We have total phosphorus was very elevated until recently, greater than 50 parts per billion. Second disc was usually too shallow. It was very shallow. It didn't go past 1.2 meters. The chlorophyll A levels were very high, and we had prolonged cyanobacteria blooms, which you're well aware of. This is just a quick graph of the chlorophyll A levels. They're about from 20 to 90, so that's about 3 times the level in the east, with the exception of a little bit of drop down beginning of 2015. So this is the main story of West Monponsett, really. Since up to 2010, you had very high levels, 50 to 70 there. And beginning in 2010, we started seeing some more fertilizer reductions from the cranberry bogs. And we also had the town apply alum in 2013, in 2015, and recently in 2016. So you can tell these alum treatments are dropping down the phosphorus in the pond, along with the cranberry bog phosphorus reductions. So we're on the right track there. This is just a brief summary of what's going on with the ponds. Stetson has issues with total phosphorus in DO. White Oak Brook has problems with total phosphorus in the duckweed. And East Monponsett has issues with total phosphorus in chlorophyll A algae. And West Monponsett has the most issues with the transparency, with chlorophyll A, with cyanobacteria, and with total phosphorus. That's just a brief summary, so you can keep that in your mind. So how do we solve this problem? How do we determine what are the sources of nutrients from the different land uses? So we use a model. We used the lake loading response model, and we used looking at land uses in the different watersheds, figuring out how much phosphorus was coming off of them, and then figuring out the volume of water coming from each different land use. And you can calculate a total phosphorus load from each land use. So that's just kind of a schematic of a land use, a forest per se, and you have land use coefficients and flow coefficients, and you come up with a load for each land use. And in addition to the land use, we looked at the sediments, we looked at septics, we looked at aerial deposition, and we looked at stormwater as well. And so the main thing about the model is you can look at all the loads, and then you can predict the concentration that you would expect based on those loads from the land use and from all these other categories. And you can predict the concentration in the pond. And that will allow us later to back calculate, using a target to figure out which loads we want to get to restore the pond. So that's the model. Okay, so there's some issues with flow in this pond. This was a complicated pond to model based on the flow diversions. The 1964 Act allows diversions from East Monponsett to Silver Lake. The diversions occur between October and June. And the West Monponsett Pond's hydrology, its flushing, is affected by this diversion. And basically, the volume of water withdrawn from East Monponsett over a year is basically equal to the amount of water that comes into it through its tributaries over a year. And then it goes into the water supply. And even a portion of West Monponsett's annual load of water is used up. So basically, what we did when we modeled this system, we took all the water going into the East Monponsett watersheds, which is Stetson and East Monponsett, and we kept those separate. And then we looked at White Oak Reservoir and West Monponsett and modeled all the water that's going into those separately, with no real connection between the two. So in addition, one of the things we were concerned about was the sediments. And we looked at the amount of phosphorus in the sediments in West Monponsett Pond. And the reason why that's important is because when you have a lot of phosphorus in a water body, you have a lot of algal blooms and things like that. And that phosphorus can become bound in the sediments. It doesn't really escape. It's not used up. It kind of recycles itself. So that's why it's important to look at the sediments. So here's Greg sampling with these taking some cores, and we incubated the cores. We looked at the phosphorus coming out of the sediments, and that gives us a good estimate of what's going on in West Monponsett Pond. In addition, we looked at some of the tributaries. We sampled Peterson Swamp, we sampled a number of other tributaries and looked at the phosphorus levels in them. And that allows us to calibrate the model. And one of the things we have found when we did that is that some of these tributaries that have freshwater wetlands and things like that, there's a lot of color coming off the wetlands, and there's also sometimes elevated phosphorus coming from these forested wetland areas. So that was important to look at. And I'll talk about that as well later. So what are the loads? What is the current land use, and what are the current activities? How are they affecting the pond in terms of total loads? The biggest loads in East Monponsett is cranberry bogs, developed areas, stormwater, and internal. Those are pretty much the biggest loads. Septic is as well. And for West Monponsett, the biggest load, where's the biggest source of phosphorus is coming from the sediments, internal. Cranberry bogs is the second biggest, and then developed areas with stormwater and septic as well. But to note, you should note that about 70% is coming between sediments and cranberry bogs of the load to the pond. Okay. So we talked a lot about the loads. How clean should the lake be? How clean should any lake be? What are the things that influence how clean it should be? And I talked about the color. Clear lakes, as I said, they're a little more sensitive to pollution because the light is getting all the way to the bottom, so you can get a lot of plants. And colored lakes, the light is being attenuated by that color, so they can kind of tolerate a slightly higher phosphorus level. So Stetson Pond, which is clear, it's right around 15 right now. We want to get it down to 13. East Monponsett, which is a little more colored, we'd like to get down to 20 or less to clean that up, especially since it's a public water supply. White Oak Reservoir is a small impoundment. It's fairly well flushed, and we've had other reservoirs, we get down to around 28 or below, it'll be fine. It should clean up and not have those duckweed issues. And West Monponsett, similarly, we want to get down to 20 parts per billion or less to clean that up. So what is that we're going to require for Stetson Pond? It's about a 30% reduction, and it's going to require reducing the phosphorus coming out of the sediments and from developed areas. So about 90% reduction from sediments and 50% from developed areas. White Oak Brook Reservoir, to get down to 28%, we need about a 50% reduction of the nutrients going into it. And largely that'll come from cranberry bogs and the developed areas, which is just residential up there. So for East Monponsett, to get down to 20, we need a 40% reduction of the loading to that lake. Cranberry bogs, around 88%, and 50% for developed areas, and 50% for stormwater. West Monponsett, which is the most polluted, requires the biggest reduction in phosphorus loads, around 71%, to get down to 20 parts per billion. That's a 90% reduction in the sediments and 50% in developed stormwater, and about 88% reduction for the cranberry bogs. So that's a very ambitious target to get to. And this is just a brief summary of that, what I just told you. So how do we do that? We can get that accomplished by reducing phosphorus in agriculture and cranberry bogs, reducing phosphorus on lawns, and the cranberry extension, UMass, Dr. Di Moranville. She has a lot of best management practices that the cranberry bogs can follow. And I have some items up here if you're a cranberry bog grower of a chart book she's developed in a town annual meeting they conduct that gives you more information about this. Another thing that the cranberry bog owners can do is redirect their discharges away from a stream or a pond and put it into an upland area or a little detention basin. And that'll reduce the phosphorus getting into the stream. Stormwater is also going to need to be controlled by the town. Those 50% reductions will have to come through either best management practices or retrofits at some point. And then the biggest thing, I guess, is the alum treatment for West Monponsett. We have done around 17 grams per meter squared of alum treatment onto West Monponsett. We think it's going to take about 33 grams per meter squared more to treat that whole load, since that is the biggest load. Let's see. And so we've done a lot of good work in terms of getting the phosphorus levels down in West Monponsett. We're almost there. We just need a little bit more work in terms of that, in terms of reducing the phosphorus loads. The biggest things long term to take care of the phosphorus is the land use, reducing the phosphorus in the land use and reducing the phosphorus internally. And if you can treat the sediments enough, it should cause the phosphorus to be bound up and not be a problem anymore. So Mark can talk a little bit more about the phosphorus applications in the future and some of the issues with them. Because one of the things we found is we've had to do small treatments over the years due to the endangered mussels, freshwater mussels that are in the pond. So it's been a somewhat slow process.
Thank you. My name is Mark Matson. I work for Mass DEP, and this is just awful. When you see something like this, it breaks your heart. And we've had one case of White Island Pond where there's also a cranberry bogs were around there and it had a problem, and it was actually worse than this. We had 86 parts per billion average, but through fertilizer reductions and some BMPs on the bogs, we reduced the phosphorus loads going in there, and then we put an alum treatment in and it cleaned up the lake, and it's been crystal clear ever since. So I want you to have some hope. I just want to go through a little bit and tell you about alum, because why did we pick alum instead of, bubbling, and why not put a mixer in there, and why not put lanthanum or gypsum or something else? Well, alum has a long, successful track record of binding up phosphorus in sediments, and it works sort of like this. You've got a bunch of phosphorus in the lake, you've got phosphorus coming in from a stream, but you got a whole bunch of phosphorus down in the bottom from years of abuse. And in the summertime, when the algae start rotting, a lot of that starts bubbling back up into the lake. So in the summertime, you get a lot more phosphorus back up into the water. What the alum does, it's aluminum sulfate, and it forms an aluminum hydroxide, and that aluminum is very reactive to phosphates, and it just binds up all the phosphorus in the water, and it also makes a flock, like a white snow in the lake for that day, and that stuff settles out to the bottom. So it cleans up the lake in about one day, temporarily, and it starts to form a coating on the bottom. Depending on how much you add, the coating gets thicker and thicker. But if you don't add enough, the more phosphorus that's down deeper will start to diffuse back up, and you could start having a problem again. And that's sort of at the point where we're at now, is that we've reduced the loads from the cranberry bogs, and we're working to reduce them even more. And the town has been applying some aluminum to the lake for the last 3 years, or with a couple of intermediate years. And we're right at the edge of our target. In fact, last year, we were close to the 20 target. We haven't released that data yet, but we're close to it. But the lake was still green. It still was just a big mess. And you might think that the lake doesn't look any better than it did 6 years ago. But I'm telling you, we're this close. We're this close to getting under our target. We might have to lower the target down a little bit further. Maybe we'll have to go down to 18 or something like that. But we're this close to doing it, and we actually gave the town a grant of $105,000 through the federal EPA. It's called the 319 grant program. And we awarded that grant to the town, and they have the money, and they have enough to put on a little bit more aluminum, which we hope will go on this spring. And we think that that'll be just enough to clean up the lake next summer. And my bet is we're going to have a clean lake next summer. All right? It's on TV. You can watch it on reruns. Now, it won't stay clean for long, though. It's just enough to clean it up for like one summer. It's enough to kind of bind things up, and you want this lake to be clean for 10 or 20 years before we have to come back and talk about it. So, in my opinion, there are 2 aluminum options that you can consider for a long-term solution, and the first one is to do a large whole lake alum treatment like they've been doing before, but they've been doing in little chunks, 7 grams one year, 5 grams one year, 5 grams another year. We think you need another 15 and 15 grams to maybe make 30 grams. You could do that, and that should last pretty long. Or you can use an aluminum pump system with a bubbler in the bottom of the lake and just dribble some aluminum in with the bubbles. And if the lake is getting green, you can kind of turn the pumps up a little faster. Now, like I said, we did this in White Island Pond. We put the big barge in there, we treated it, and it cleaned up, and we published this in Lake and Reservoir Management. I have a few reprints of that if any of you are interested in the technical details. In that pond, like I said, it was up here around 80, which is worse than yours. There was reduced phosphorus on the bogs, and the bogs did some diversions. The phosphorus went down just by doing that, and then they hit it with 20 grams. It still didn't reach our target. We put on the final 30 grams, and then it did, and it's been clean ever since. So that's one way to do it. Ken Wagner, a friend of mine, has been studying similar aluminum treatments done on lakes in the Cape, and there's like 10 of them, and they've all been pretty successful, pretty long-term work. Here's one from Hamblin Pond. The Secchi disc was only about 1.2 meters, which is about our standard. It was pretty green. You couldn't see into the water very far. They put aluminum treatment in 1995, and the visibility went up to 5 meters, so that's like 16 feet of visibility. It lasted for 20 years, and then suddenly it went bad again, and then they put another treatment in last year, and it cleaned up again. So there's a case where it lasted 20 years. West Monponsett, it's very similar. We have like 70, and we're working our way down. We're around 20 now since in 2016, and we think that we can push it down below that target and clean it up. Now, the reason that we haven't cleaned it all up at once, why not do this 5 years ago, is that there's these endangered species in the lake. And the tidewater mucket and the eastern pond mussel. And the law says we have to protect these endangered species, and there was concern that the aluminum might be toxic to them, so they said, well, you can put it on, but put it on a little bit at a time and monitor the muscles. So it takes a few years to build up those doses in small amounts. That's why we're doing it kind of slow. Now, the one disadvantage of the big barge treatment, put on the 30 and you go away for 20 years, is that this might sound funny to you. The lake might become too clear. And what do I mean by that? Well, if the lake becomes clear and you have light getting all the way to the bottom, well, the plants might start to grow in very deep water, and it might grow up to the surface. It might become a nuisance itself. And so you kind of change one problem for another problem. And in this case, you might want to fine-tune how clean you get this lake. And so the other option is to do this microfloc injector. And it's basically, you put the aluminum in a tank on shore, and you have two pumps in a box. You put this in a house, and there's two lines going out underwater that are weighted. And one line is an air pump, and one line is an aluminum pump. And then the two lines go up there to this bubbler, and the bubbler bubbles up, and it carries this aluminum up just a little bit each day, so you don't really notice anything happening, but that way it clears up the lake day by day, and you can just say, the lake is still green, let's turn up the knob. And then you say, the lake is getting too clean, let's turn it down the knob. That's kind of the idea of it. Now, this is probably a more expensive way to do it, because you're going to have someone watching it, and probably an expert come and monitor it once a year. And it's going to be pumps running. It'll probably only run in the summertime, but still, it's a more expensive way to do it. But like I said, it's a more fine-tuned way of approaching it. This method has been used in other lakes. It's not frequently used, but in Newman Lake, they used it and it was very successful. In Lake Mohawk in New Jersey, they've used it. It was successful. And in White Meadow Lake, also in New Jersey, they used it, and here's their tank and pumps. And all you're going to see from shore is just a little area of bubbles coming up in the lake, but there might be several bubblers. But that's the basic idea. Someone asked me the other day, well, why not gypsum, which is another chemical that binds phosphorus. And gypsum is used to bind phosphorus in agricultural fields. It's kind of good if the phosphorus concentrations are high. It's not so good if the concentrations are low. And I could only find one case where gypsum was used in a lake, and that was in Finland. And they said, yeah, it cleaned it up, but their lake was 10 times worse than yours. They had 5,000 milligrams in their lake, and they got it down to 500, and we want to get it down to 18. So it's like, yeah, it worked. It went from 5,000 to 500, but that's nowhere near good enough for what you guys need. So I wouldn't recommend that. There are a bunch of other methods, and if you're interested in them, there's this report from Environmental Eutrophication and Aquatic Plant Management in Massachusetts, the final generic environmental impact report. It goes through in all of the methods, bubblers, diversions, aluminum, and basically it's favors aluminum in most cases, and I'm the author of the report, so I think it's a good report. I guess that's all I've got. You want to take over questions?
Sure.
Okay, one question on the island.
Yeah.
After all the work that you do on the expense of the island, seeing how Monpont's only 6 feet deep, and the state's put in this beautiful boat landing, do outboard motors have any effect on the island treatments?
No.
So once it doesn't turn it up at all?
No, White Island Pond, that one, it's down in Plymouth. You take your motorboat out there, there's lots of motorboats.
It's only 6 feet deep?
It's about average 6 feet deep. It's like 14 feet, about the same as these.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a question, Paul Carlos from the Monponsett Watershed Association. I read your draft,
Okay.
listened to you tonight,
Yep.
and I noticed that you have repeatedly referred to East Monponsett Pond as the water supply that goes to Silver Lake. And I'm wondering if you're doing that deliberately or you're just making a mistake. Because Chapter 371 of the Acts 1964 says that Brockton, City of Brockton may divert from Monponsett Pond to Silver Lake. It doesn't say East Monponsett, it says one pond. And as a practical matter, as you well know, and the reason that we're here is the two ponds are constantly mixing because of the tunnel under Route 58. So when you have fresh water flow, natural flow, the bluer water goes into West Monponsett Pond. When they divert, it goes the other way. So for you to say that East Monponsett Pond alone is the water supply is wrong.
Well, I guess I wouldn't interpret it that way. I'm saying that it's a Class A water body, which maybe it's just a difference in, it's a technicality type thing. What I'm saying is,
No, it's not technicality. You cited it, you phrased it that way 3 or 4 times in your report, and you said it again tonight. So you need to correct that. And this will all be put in writing. We'll have comments to
Okay,
the DEP by the comment editor. That is flat out wrong. And the reason I'm concerned about this, you know when I first heard that kind of phrase? It was in the Brockton Water Department about 3 years ago, when they decided that, oh, well, we better create this situation where they're telling people that they're only taking water from East Monponsett Pond, which is, let me finish, which is cleaner, obviously, than West Monponsett Pond. So they tried that argument with a reporter from the Brockton Enterprise until I produced photos that I took of the water in October 2012 coming from west to east through the tunnel. And then they dropped that argument. I've never heard it since until I saw this report. So
Well-
I'm a little concerned that the DEP is tilting towards a theory that the Brockton Water Department put forth a few years ago.
I wouldn't say that.
Of course you wouldn't, you wrote this.
Well, a portion of that water from West Monponsett is,
But that's not what you're saying. You did not say portion. You said East Monponsett Pond is a water supply. You said it more than once, and you said it again tonight.
well, I'm sorry I said it, if it was interpreted that way.
I'm just reading the English language.
Well, what I'm saying now is the amount of water that goes into East, that's over a year, that amount of water, all that goes and is used for public water, is diverted for public water supply. And a portion of the West as well. The total, over a year, that annual load of water that goes to West, a portion of that is also used.
Right.
So yes.
Yeah. But
Okay.
that's not the way this is written. And it's flawed.
Well-
It's flawed, and we'll send a communication to the commissioner about that, because I think it's potentially politically damaging in many ways.
Okay.
What
Yes.
does it mean to be a Class A water supply?
So any reservoir that has water going into it, all the tributaries and all the streams going into that, that water body are considered Class A, which means that it has the highest protections and it has the strictest standards for it. Kim was talking about the different standards. Class A water bodies have the highest standards in terms of dissolved oxygen, in terms of pretty much everything. So that's what it means.
Yeah,
So are both
basically,
east and west considered Class A?
yes.
Yes.
Yes, so it's all public water supplies or their tributaries are Class A, and they are designated as outstanding resource waters, which they're supposed to be protected to the highest degree because they're a public water supply.
Yeah,
I'm from Stetson Pond. Will there be a recommendation that Stetson also get an alum treatment?
That would be the recommendation, yes. Yeah.
While we're talking about additional water bodies, you mentioned, in the report, it mentions that White Oak Reservoir is a tributary source for West Monponsett, and
Right.
it's inhered by nutrients. I
Right.
didn't see mention of a remediation plan for that water body, though.
That would be cranberry bog actions. I talked to the owner of the cranberry bog upstream of that impoundment, and he's told me he's reduced his phosphorus by 50%. Some of our more recent stream samples upstream of that showed lower phosphorus levels as well. So that would mainly be best management practices by the cranberry bogs and some best management practices by the homeowners, not using phosphorus in the fertilizer, things like that.
Thank you.
So,
How would you, actually, how do you measure fertilizer reduction from the cranberry bog? How would you, I don't know if we take their word for it, that's great, but how do we measure that? Would it be any-
do you want to talk on that?
Well, aside from the record of what's applied, there's no way to measure what was applied other than what is applied. So I guess in a sense you are taking the word. Under state regulation, however, that went into effect last year, growers do have to keep records that can be demanded from them by the Department of Agricultural Resources. So they are mandated to keep accurate records.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. With the White Island Pond, the case you cited earlier, did they have a cyanobacteria bloom associated with that pond as well? I think, as you know, I think probably what's concerning a lot of people in this room is that we were over 2.1 million cells a couple of times this summer in the West Basin. And so while we're certainly interested in phosphorus levels and we're interested in clarity, ultimately I think we're most concerned about the cyanobacteria bloom. And we're trying to see if there's any other corollaries in other lakes you've experienced with levels of cyanobacteria that high compared to the levels of phosphorus that we're seeing in this pond.
Do you know what the levels were, Mark?
It was actually worse in White Island Pond. It was so bad that it would form scums that would be like a ½ inch thick, you know, and they'd start coming up on shore. So it was actually worse in that one.
Yeah, and the phosphorus, there were reductions from cranberry bogs there as well, and the aluminum treatment cleaned that one up. So, yeah.
Alex Mansfield with Jones River Watershed Association. First I want to echo what Paul said about the east and west ponds. It's something that we will be commenting on. Also, in fact, just to add a little support to what Paul said, Chapter 371 describes the diversions from Monponsett Pond as occurring in Halifax and in Hanson. And for that to be the case, that act must be talking about West Monponsett Pond. None of the east is in Hanson. So the Acts of 361, 371 is very clear that they're talking about the entirety of Monponsett Pond. It's not just east. So I agree with that comment. The other thing that, and we'll be sending you comments, but you list a series of sources and a series of impacts. And in your report, you have a whole section where you describe the impact of diversions. And I think you do a good job of that. You capture the impact of those diversions, including stating that stopping those diversions would reduce West Monponsett Pond total phosphorus by 24% or more.
Right.
However, you don't mention the diversions at all in the implementation sections of this report or in this presentation. So in fact, your modeling, you cut off the connections between east and west and don't really talk about diversions into Silver Lake. And I understand this is a TMDL for Monponsett and not for Silver Lake. But when you clearly have outlined the impact of the diversions, the impact to Class A waters, the impact to Silver Lake, that you well described in this report, how can you not have diversions as part So
So all of our reports have found about 24% reduction for our model matched other models that found about 20-30% reduction if you stop the diversion in total phosphorus. But they all concluded that just stopping the diversion alone would not solve the problem. It's the upland watersheds as well, the land use, the nutrients, that really has to be controlled on a long-term basis to get down to these
Right,
20
and in all
parts
of
per
your
billion.
scenarios, you show multiple things that you have to do. You have to reduce cranberry bog, you have to reduce stormwater.
Yeah.
But you don't list that 24% reduction you can get from diversions as one of the implementation pieces.
We feel that getting the phosphorus levels down for both ponds will solve the problem. So,
Right. Like, is a diversion, reduction of diversions part of the solution?
right now we have it set in the TMDL to control the land uses, and we believe that will be the most effective long-term thing to do.
I'm lost on that. So, I'm really lost on that. I've been listening to these meetings for 2 years. How can you take something that is 24% of the remedy and just eliminate it from your implementation plan?
It's, just if I may,
Yeah.
it's not 24% of the remedy, and that would be a sliding scale, so that, you know, let's say that you reduced only one of the loads that are going into the pond. That means the other ponds become a greater percentage, but the way that the, that would go.
Could you stand
Sure,
up?
sure. And I'm trying to explain this out on the front, so I'm saying practice is all. My name's John Caldwell, I work in the Southeast region. The 24% is 24% continually, so it does not really depend upon the concentration. So in other words, if the concentration were, say, 5 micrograms per liter, just throw the number out there, and the 24% would be down to, say, so you didn't get a 4. And so it's a sliding scale, but by bringing the other ones down, those are loads that are consistent with the concentrations we have. So by bringing those loads down, you're doing an actual measure of finite thing, where the 25% of the sliding thing, it depends upon how much is in the pond. I know that's not really that clear. And maybe you can help me out a little bit with that, Mark. You understand where I'm going?
Let me ask it then in a layman's way. Let me ask the question in a layman's way. First a question and then a comment, okay? Do you agree that if the diversions didn't occur, the problem would not be as severe?
Yes, it
So why
exacerbates
did
it.
I'm sorry.
It exacerbates the problem.
Thank you. I
Yes.
appreciate you saying that. So the follow-up question is, then why in your implementation plan, because there's a general consensus that Brockton is driving your train, why in your implementation plan are you not recommending stopping the diversions? If you read the 1964 Act, the 1964 law, it made crystal clear, and David knows this, that these diversions will never impact the quality of the water and the use of those bodies for recreation. Now, you have just submitted that the diversions are exacerbating the problem. So my question is the same one Paul had. It's the same one Alex had. Why is it not part of the solution that we stop these diversions? Monponsett Pond was supposed to be used as a supplement. Now Brockton is using more water than Silver Lake can supply. So it has now turned into a body of water that is supplying drinking water to Brockton. You're not supposed to be involved in the politics of it, so I'm asking you for a scientific perspective. Who told you not to use diversions in your implementation plan? I'm a politician too, so I could ask you privately, but who instructed you not to recommend the termination of diversions to stop exacerbating this problem?
Well, I can,
Yeah.
It's a very simple question, and John is always good with technical responses. This isn't a technical issue. So we'd like to know, Dave.
Well,
I can answer as best I can. I'm Dave Johnson, I work in the region. I can tell you who asked these folks to do the math that gave you guys the 24% conclusion of impact. And that person standing right here.
That's correct.
And the reason I asked them to do that is because, you know, we concluded that the diversions were having some impact on what's going on out there. And, you know, believe your eyes. You've got East Monponsett, which looks quite good. You've got West Monponsett that doesn't. So, you know, our working conclusion was that the diversions from East Monponsett, Paul's correct, the legislation says Monponsett, so we don't differentiate between the diversions being from East Monponsett or West Monponsett. The diversions, in accordance with the act, the law, that gives Proctor the right, says Monponsett Pond. So that's where the diversions come from. Now, you know, as sort of though, when you look at the reality of how the ponds are configured, we all know that there's only one culvert that connects them. So any water that has to get into West Monponsett from East Monponsett has to go through that culvert. It's not very big. So, you know, when we were looking at the reality of how the system works, without having the science that these gentlemen are talking about, we thought that it was very possible that one of the reasons West Monponsett looks different than East Monponsett is because the water that leaves East Monponsett to go to Silver Lake does not go to West Monponsett Pond. And we asked these folks to run the computer models that validate that. So, you know, what our computer models tell us is that the diversions are having a 24, without the diversions, the phosphorus level in West Monponsett Pond would be 24% lower. Simple enough. So, you know, what these folks are tasked with doing is figuring out what is the best, quickest, most effective way to get to a clear pond. As far as I know, no one said to them, look at diversions, don't look at diversions. You know, these folks look at nutrients. They look at where the nutrients come from. They look at where are the nutrients right now. They look at where will the nutrients be coming from in the future. And how do we stop nutrients from getting there? So that's what they were tasked to do, and that's what they're talking about doing. Now, what John and I do is we try to take that information and do the best we can to roll back kind of in every area. So after this TMDL is done, it is not an enforcement document at all. It's just a roadmap. It just says nutrients are the biggest problem. If you get rid of the nutrients and you treat with alum, we think the lake will be clear. So that's what this TMDL does. Now, what the work that these folks did to draw the conclusion that the diversions would, if they stopped happening, the level of phosphorus would be down 24% in West Monponsett Pond. What that does is it tells us, as Tom mentioned, that there is a portion of the legislation we need to look at. And the portion that Tom is referencing is the portion that says we need to have a pond that's suitable for bathing, boating, and whatnot. And, you know, and we are working with Brockton to try to address some of their practices. Now, you know, when John and I do what we do, we try to look at the law that Representative Paul was talking about. We also look at the license that Mass DP has with Brockton that is linked back to the law. And we look at the fact that Brockton has registrations to use water. We look at the fact that we have nutrients heading into the pond. And we try to do the best we can to get to an all-encompassing response that will hopefully bring these ponds back to where they need to be. So we are working with Brockton. You know, I don't think you're going to see anything in the TMDL, although you're free to add comments. You know, that's part of what this is. If this is a glaring omission, let us know. But, you know, you all have seen the draft, and its focus is on nutrients and nutrient reduction and nutrient treatment. That's what it does. What we are working on is an agreement with Brockton to try to address their management practices. And is that going to turn off the diversion pipe? Well, it's not. It's not. But we are standing here today and benefiting from the math, the computer models that we're sharing with you that conclude the diversions, if they didn't occur, West Monponsett Pond would have a lower phosphorus level. Now, you're also hearing that we think with significant reductions in nutrients and algae treatment that we can get there regardless. So, stopping the diversions alone is not going to get it.
David, if I make one comment, then I promise I'll be quiet. You all have the right to comment on this. I know that the diversions alone don't get us there, right? I know that. I also know that the pond is better off if there are no diversions. I guess the question I have is, before the final report, the TMLD report is written, why wouldn't terminating the diversions, because we know that there's a wall between you. One is not driving the other. Why not have the final report say that it would be 24% better in the implementation schedule if we stop the diversions? Because as they know, you're negotiating a consent order with Brockton that'll be published in the next several weeks, okay? If we stop the diversions, Monponsett Pond can restore itself, because I don't know where the $400,000 is going to come from for the alum treatment. I don't think you have it. I know Halifax doesn't have it, and shouldn't have to come up with it. So we can talk about going to 34 from 17, but it's going to cost close to $500,000. So in theory, it sounds great. In reality, we can't talk about the ponds being clean next year unless we know where that money's coming from. We do know that with a 24% improvement by stopping the diversions, we're already close. It's going to be much better if we stop the diversions. And then let's deal with the reality that Silver Lake cannot provide the amount, 11 million gallons a day, that Brockton requires. Now, having said that, because I won't say another word, I do want to thank you. David's right. It was DEP that commissioned the report for the, I can never remember the acronym.
Yeah.
So and I appreciate that. They're working very hard to negotiate a consent order that works. Sometimes we've been at odds. I've actually walked out of the office several times, but these folks have worked very hard, and we should appreciate their efforts. We now have the state working on our behalf, and we do appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut anybody off. I need to say something about it. I've been working in the state for 20 years now. I didn't see anything in the report that said by get rid of the diversion, because the whole purpose of having a dam on the lake, on the West Lake, is because of the diversion. Am I correct? So, first of all, they're both involved in it, as we said earlier. So how can you not? If they didn't need the dam on West Lake, if they're not using the water from there too. Two, why wasn't they putting the fact that they could open up the dam? Because the lake's stagnant. Because it's still, phosphorus flows to the bottom because it's not flowing. Why wasn't the place to remove the dam to let the water flow its natural flow? Because it flows from east to west.
Well, we asked Matt and Mark to run a model of what it would look like if we opened up the dam and we gave the pond a big flush. And they'll jump in and correct my response if I go astray.
That work was done by Fish and Wildlife.
Thought you guys ran that too.
We ran a calculation too, I think, of lowering the lake level,
Lowering it by
couple feet or.
like 2 feet. Some of the lowering didn't really have as much effect as what you might expect. It was.
Well, if you correct me, I recall this because I asked you to do it. And I asked them to do it because Paul Collins had mentioned the idea, and it seemed like a good idea. So, much like we all heard that there was thoughts that the diversions were, could be having some kind of impact. We ran the models of the models. And that's the beauty of science. And We also ran a model for lowering the lake level, and it came back that the conditions would be worse. And the reason it came back the conditions would be worse is because as you lower the lake, you have less volume in the lake. When you have less volume in the lake, there's less dilution. The other thing that happens when you have less volume in the lake and you lower the lake is it gets warmer. And when the lake gets warmer, you can have worse cyanobacteria blooms. So, in looking at, where we thought we could work effectively, that wasn't one of the things that was borne out by science.
If I may, I moved here in '73. I lived down off the lake. I could walk almost 50 feet up to the lake, 4 feet deep, clear water, you see fish from the curb. That was before the dam was put up. After the dam was put up. But it still causes a problem because the dam put up, stopped all the weeds that normally would flow, all the diverse weeds that have died, plants that died and filled in the trench. My thoughts are, why not dredge it and open up the dam and let it flow and then clean it up?
Well, dredging is really expensive. Brockton has a legal right to have a dam. They just do. They've had, that dam's been in there for, I think, well over 100 years. And there's been 2 or 3 licenses before that.
It's the third dam that we know
So
of.
it's the
At least the third dam.
third dam that we know of going back, I think, 100 years or so. So, when we do this, we're not here talking about not agreeing there's a problem. So, there's a problem. So when we do this, we look at, getting the best science we can. We talked about the models that validated some assumptions. Doesn't support some other assumptions. It validates the assumption that the diversion, not having diversion would lower phosphorus by 24%. Does not validate that, taking the dam away and lowering the whole level is going to help. But the other thing we do is we look at, how do we get to the outcome we want to get to, the fastest way we can get there. And so, that's why what you're hearing is that, addressing the nutrients and treating the lake gets us there the fastest. Now, turning the diversions off does not get us there the fastest. So, so the other thing is we look at when we do this is we look at all of the laws, the requirements, the tools we have to make things happen. And you kind of put them all out there, you look through them, take a look at your problem, take a look at the range of solutions, and and how you can, which road you take to get to the solution. And when we did all that, looking at the fact that Brockton has a license and a statute that authorizes a dam, authorizes diversions. We looked at the fact that we've got plenty of supporting documentation for the substantial amount of phosphorus that is in the sediments. Stopping diversions does not make that phosphorus in the sediments go away. We look at the fact that we know from the different land uses how much nutrients are going in there. So so we look at all of these things and we come up with what we think to be the best path forward. That has the highest success of succeeding on the timeline that we all want to see. So that's, what you're seeing is a TMDL that focuses primarily on nutrients, and we're working on an agreement with Brockton that will, hopefully enhance some of their major practices, and then, and you're hearing from our specialists that we think we do these things, and in the fairly near term, we'll see substantial improvement.
Just one last thing.
We'll get back to go, but there's a couple other hands. This gentleman's waiting.
Okay, I'm the bad guy, Brockton Water Commissioner. Okay? Now, I've been a commissioner for 2 years, and I've heard nothing come out of the Plymouth County Commissioners, come out of everybody. Diversion, diversion, diversion. Here's your chance, here's your opportunity. You got Mr. Coulter there. He can go out and seek the funds. He can pressure the legislator.
You're talking to
Why don't
people.
you, if you have a chance to clean this problem up, diversion isn't gonna solve the problem.
You're right, what does solve the problem is the money comes from Brockton, that they're floating.
Why should Brockton pay for your mistake?
No, this is your mistake. Your mistake.
That they can take from. Why doesn't Brockton take from the Toad River Shed?
This is not about mistakes.
Why didn't Brockton take from their sanitation?
the attitude that we're dealing
This is
with.
not, you know what?
You know what, I'm gonna take control,
Exactly.
okay? I'm gonna take control, you need to sit down. And I'm gonna tell you that this tone is partly because of this report. Yes, 25%, and I do feel that it should have been part of the solution. I really do. And maybe the diversion isn't gonna solve all of it, but when Troy brings up the dam and we talk about stagnation, we sat in many meetings with you before this was developed, and we explained to you our concerns about stagnation. And then for you to stand here and to not really acknowledge that yes, maybe it will not solve it right away, but let's do the quickest, easiest thing, which is for the Halifax to throw more money at an issue that we don't have anymore. We have treated these ponds with Allen with our own tax dollars. We don't own these ponds, these are state ponds. And so I don't want to just do the quick fix. I want to fix the pond in the right way. And I want you to look at stagnation. And I want you to study it. Because long term, and all the people that have lived around the ponds for many years will tell you that over the years, it's gotten worse.
Well, I don't disagree. You know, so let's though try to be careful and cordial to everybody. Everybody has a right to a question and a comment, but let's please try to keep some calm and order. And you know, everything we talk about here today, please do write those comments down and send them on in. You know, the purpose of a draft TMDL in a meeting is so that you can hear all of this and you'll see, you know, where we're heading, what we're thinking. You'll know what we know. You know, hopefully if we have a good meeting, when we leave, you'll know everything we know. And then, you know, send along your comments and we'll take those into account. So, you know, what I'm trying to express is, you know, our current thinking, why we approach things the way we're approaching them. And you know, please share your comments. I don't know who was next. I think this gentleman's waited for quite a while.
Is there a logical explanation why there's only a difference between 35 and 50 parts per million in the phosphorus of those two? But this summer we had like 2 million counts on the Green Lake, and it was undetectable levels on the Plain Lake.
I think, Mark, you're going to put that one if you can.
Yeah, this year was an unusual year. It was a drought year. Last year was a drought year, and actually that's probably why East Lake kind of cleaned up quite a bit, because a lot of lakes tend to clean up in dry years.
What is the reason?
Well, that's pretty complicated. You know, it deals with groundwater levels being lower because the water's going to a deeper mineral soil and things like that.
Plus runoff.
And runoff is, anyway. Now, why was west so bad when it was close to 20? The funny thing is about algae is you don't necessarily get twice as much at 60 and 4 times as much at 100 and 8 times as much at 200, because at a certain point they become limited by light and things like that. So even at 20, even at 21 or something like that, they can have tremendous blooms. And it's only when you reach this point where phosphorus becomes limiting below 20 that suddenly they feel the pain and they can't grow. You've actually taken away a vital nutrient from them, and that's when it'll clean up, and it becomes quite dramatic below that.
Right.
But up above that, you just don't see much.
If we were to drop the phosphorus levels with the alum and so forth, would the bacteria count in the West Lake go to non-detectable levels like it is in the East?
Well,
It's not an undetected piece, just to be clear. Yeah, the threshold is 70,000 cells.
Many reports were undetected.
I think they hovered around 3,000, 4,000.
About 1,000 is where the level is. And if I can sorry, if I can just say something about this, is that the cyanobacteria is probably, Michael, 15 different species, major species, shall we say? And the cyanobacteria that were detected this year, and largely we think because of the phosphorus reductions that have occurred, there's been a shift in the species. And I'm sorry.
So I don't really care about that.
But let me finish. And the reason why is that these are smaller cells. So just
small
like
cells grow on the West Lake?
no, well, let me finish. Just like 5 small people will eat as much as one big person. The similar thing. These are smaller cells, so you're going to have a number of cells going to increase. They're going to eat the same amount of food. They're going to have the same amount of nutrients going into them. But we believe that the shift of the lower phosphorus has caused a shift. And these cyanobacteria live there all the time. They're there, and it's just like when they get the right conditions, that's when they explode. That's when you see the big bloom. But the blooms we were getting were of a different species than we've had in previous years. Now, again, I'm not, and I'm going to go more into this. Well, but I'm just saying, that's why the numbers are much.
Nothing to do with the size of the organism.
So the numbers do.
Excuse me, the line of thinking is that the phosphorus is what you're trying to attack the foul, but it's the cyanobacteria that we are concerned about.
Correct.
And the cyanobacteria are grossly overpopulating this West Lake, right? And when we had the opportunity to open the sluice gates for 2 weeks, it wasn't a model, it was actual, we got Brockton to open the sluice gates. The level of bacteria in the West Lake went down below 70,000 counts for the first time in 3 years. And it was just proof that if you can flush from the clean water and move it into the ugly water and move it over the dam and down the river, it has a cleansing effect on the cyanobacteria. We don't know what it did to the phosphate. Maybe you'll argue that point, but we're concerned about the bacteria. And that was proof that it worked. And it wasn't just, it goes up and down. When they closed the sluice gates, it went right back up to well over 70,000 counts, and that lake was closed again. In another year, we had an early time because of some flooding conditions where we allowed, as Brockton to pump, divert, when this West Lake was contaminated, and the contamination was sucked back into the East Lake, and for the first time in 3 years, East Lake went above 70,000 and was closed, just because we had an early diversion and we pumped the bacteria across the culvert and damaged the other lake. So that is the story of natural flow going one way, cleaning, and diversion going the other way, moving bacteria into clean sources. And it's the thing that concerns us that makes it linked to diversions that is not being addressed when you talk about we want to lower phosphate. Because even if you lower phosphate, as long as you have cyanobacteria in gross numbers over on the West Lake and you divert, you're going to draw it back into East Lake, and then we've already seen what happens.
Well, we have, Brockton is running their diversion rate at 50% this year. And that is an attempt to not have the backflow from west to east.
So it's going to be more stagnant. Westlake's going to be more stagnant now because there isn't even a flow.
No.
Cell counts below 70.
Let me try to explain it better.
Okay.
Typically, when Brockton used to divert, they opened the pipe all the way. And a full open pipe would bring a certain amount of water from East Monponsett to Silver Lake. And that volume was enough that it would pull water from West Monponsett into East Monponsett. And these guys talked about that. So now Brockton is running the diversion pipe happily. And what that does, so it slows down.
A couple times, but it's not the main focus. Anyway, stagnant water is not mentioned at all, the effect of stagnant water. So I was like, well, I've done a lot of reading on this over the years, and I seem to recall that there's 3 main ingredients in producing harmful algal blooms, as they're called. Sunlight, slow-moving water, and nutrients. Now this I got from the EPA site today. So we'll assume it's legitimate. And you've talked a little about sunlight. You've talked a lot about nutrients. You haven't talked about slow-moving water. And that's what the people who are talking about the dam are focusing on. That for years, Brockton has manipulated the gates in the dam to maximize the level of the pond, because in Section 9, Chapter 371, the Acts of 1964, there are standards for diversion. And if the pond falls below 52 feet above sea level elevation, they cannot divert. So for example, today as we speak, I looked at the Brockton water report. Monponsett Pond is 8 inches below that 52 level. Legally, they can't divert. So our contention is that they have kept the pond high as an assurance of always having water when we need it. Not knowing over the years that that would have this effect, combined with everything else. And I'm not saying there's a sole source of a problem. It's a multifaceted problem, and a multifaceted solution is needed. But you need to put into the report the effect of stagnant water in producing cyanobacteria in this situation. Because it's not there at all.
Yeah, so Barb is recording all the questions. So, you know, for those of you that can't send in written comments, please recording it. We will respond it. As John pointed out, you know, we use the models that we have available to us. And there's always uncertainty with the models. And so, you know.
Well, I don't think the models should be myopic. In other words, I think you need a broader view. You know, you can't be constrained by your models, because obviously the model isn't considering this cyanobacteria effect of stagnant water. Well, if it is, I didn't read it.
I'd also like you to consider though, that internal load is real and the cranberry bog loads is real. So those are all real things I want you to consider.
No one's saying they're not.
Okay, I just want
But what we're
to put
saying
that out
is
there.
there's key things missing, like the effect of stagnant water.
We understand, so noted, there's a number of factors that are contributing to this problem, and we hear what you're highlighting, and we'll take the factors into consideration.
Just one last thing.
Well, we've got another question back here.
Been here for a while, sir.
Yeah. We want to give everybody.
You went and, never mind this, you said the sediment of phosphorus in both ponds is about the same levels, correct? That's down on the bottom in the dirt?
The levels we measured in the west, the amount of phosphorus coming out is much higher.
Okay. But I have one quick thing. You also mentioned that the amount of water that East Lake produces per year goes to Silver Lake. Okay? The amount of its tributaries, the springs, all that, pretty much all goes to Silver Lake.
Right.
So it turns over at least once completely. Every gallon in there is gone. Now, we know how much of Westlake gets turned over from water going out, because the way I see it is East Lake on the right is that color because it's turned over once a year. It's gone from what Brockton takes out of it. Now, Westlake, I didn't hear how much of that is turned over with the table.
Yeah, so East. Oh, did I? No, I think it's in the beginning.
East turns over twice as often at 4.4.
Yeah. I just want to get the right number, so I'm not saying the wrong thing. So the retention time for the flushing for west is twice a year, and for east is 4.4 times. So basically, what you said is right. East, the water is leaving east regardless of whether it goes out the west, just for east now, whether it goes out the west or whether it goes out to the diversion. So its retention and its flushing is.
I wouldn't believe you.
You wouldn't?
No, because we have computer models and we account for the phosphorus.
I think some tests might have been done this year that says they're about the same for the core samples. For phosphorus.
Yeah, send us the results and then we'll look at it.
So I'm just staying on the flow thing on he's turning over that much compared to west. That is it because it's just sitting there not flowing is why it can come out of the soil in west and not east. I'm just confused on this.
I mean, you could put a whole lot more into east and it would absorb it because it just gets flushed out faster, even if there
Right.
was a big source
So
there.
stagnation is the problem.
Well, that's what the turnover time is. That
Yeah.
is the measure of stagnation. That's right. You know, and we modeled it both ways, with the diversion and without the diversion. And it does make it worse in West Monponsett.
How would it make it worse? Is if you had the same amount of gallons, was it 12 million a day that Brockton's doing with a half load? during the
Yeah,
off-
12 million a day, yeah.
All right. So if that 12 million a day was still turning over out of east into west and going downstream, I don't understand how that would make it worse.
No, no.
You just, that's what you just said, with or without the diversions.
Now, with the diversion, it's worse. And if you stop the diversion, west would be cleaner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And a point to that and a question on that, and eastward. Your report also says that 40% of the nutrient load to east comes from sucking West Monponsett Pond water into east.
There would be a slight impact on east because of that dirty water coming from west into east.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
It would be a
you don't need to
slightly
model
worse
that.
problem there too.
Common sense. What would the flushing rate of West Monponsett Pond be if there were no diversions?
I had to look that up. It's been a while since I ran that. It would be higher, for sure. I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
So can you go back to, you had one slide that showed like a general overview of the watershed and all the contributions to West Monponsett. I think it's that one there. So if we're looking at that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a whole bunch of these contributions to West Monponsett. It looks like that's pretty much the end of the line for the watershed, correct?
This is the delineated watershed for the whole area, for all the different ponds.
But all these flows seem to be going into either west or east.
Right,
Monponsett,
right.
correct? And West Monponsett only has the one outlet, Stump Brook.
Right.
Right. So later on in the presentation, you're going to say the greatest source of phosphorus is from internal loading. Is it a coincidence that since that was dammed up for the last 50 years, and it's at the end of the line, everything flowed in there, contributed to that internal loading?
I don't know that I can answer that.
But in your
Do you have any ideas, Mark?
In my opinion, the load to the west has a much higher cranberry load, and it probably had an even higher cranberry load historically. So I believe that, along with the development, there's just a lot of sources to the west that exceed the sources to the east. And over years and years and years, the algae sink to the bottom and it just builds up phosphorus in the bottom. And that's why in the summertime when it gets warm, that phosphorus starts bubbling back up.
No, I understand that with the sources coming in. I guess what I'm trying to say is that with the dam there, I mean, is that preventing any of the outlet, any of the water coming out? You mentioned White Island Pond a lot in previous discussion. Wanted to ask to get any experience with Santuit Pond down in Mashpee, where they redid the dam. Very similar problem with the algae blooms. They redid the dam, they restored flow. They didn't lower the lake, but they increased the flow leading. They put in a number of solar bees down there. And the pond over the last couple of years has really taken a turn for the better. Got very clear. In fact, it actually has started more of those weeds coming up because of the clarity of the water. But it's just difficult to read the TMDL if there's no part of the implementation, that proper management of the outflow. And we're not saying, you know, I mean, removing the dam is obviously something we're talking about, but better management. I mean, for 40 to 50 years to not allow any flushing or outflow, and now you're telling us that the largest source of phosphorus is coming from internally in the pond. It's really hard to believe that the two of those aren't related together.
Well, we modeled it both with the diversion and without the diversion, and we modeled it with the lake at the level and at a lower level if you removed some of the Stump Brook Dam and lowered the lake down. And that's all I can tell you is the diversion is impacting at 24%, and the lowering the lake level didn't have a big impact. So, and I'm telling you, why is the internal sources high in West Monponsett? It's because there's more cranberry bogs and I think might be higher development there.
But there's nowhere for it to go.
And
Well,
The organic matter and stuff that is sitting there accumulating every year that can't escape. It's, you know, it's a buildup. That's what makes it's a buildup of muck that can't get anywhere, can't
There's a
escape.
trough that goes from east to west. To that lake, and we're going to change because the trough goes down. It used to flow to the dam and not flow through all the weeds and everything else. The reason the phosphorus is in the soil as much as it is because of the lack of management, the lack of flow, the corporation from the primary policies, they probably realized what they were doing, but at the time, they were using phosphorus fertilizer as well as around the lake. And just to let the commission know, I've been on this board for 27 years. I've been working on this for a long time. They have to be fully together. So when you tell me it's our fault, I think you've got to start looking internally again.
Okay, well, please submit your comments in writing, because sometimes we don't get it quite right listening over the crowd, so if you can, put it in writing.
I'll tell you what, we'll give you a copy of the tape.
Okay, thank you.
So this is, we're talking about, this is a draft. Are you going to see a second version of the draft with our comments in it? How long will that take?
What we do is, we'll give a 30-day comment period, and then we start revising and looking at the comments, and it usually takes us a few months to consider all the comments and come up with either if we have to make changes to the document, we do, or if we don't, we give you an answer why we didn't. And at that point, the report becomes final on our end, but it still has to go through EPA review. And you can talk to them about whether they want to accept it or to reject it, but it's a federal Clean Water Act, and they have to make the decision.
Just a very quick question, and I apologize in advance if it's not 100% germane to the Monponsett discussion, but I heard you talk earlier about the endangered species and the concern for the mussels in the Monponsett ponds. Has anybody looked at the mussel graveyard that Silver Lake has turned into? Because Brockton is sucking it dry day by day. It is an absolute mussel graveyard there. And I think
Same species.
it's the same species.
Yeah, we were there just today. I saw thousands of them. And I asked, you know, like the endangered species people and us, we say, yeah, that's bad, but the law is the law.
What is the law?
The law is that they can do the diversion, and I'm just a scientist, I can't change the law. So if you want to fix that, you have to change.
But all we ask you to do is to make the TMDL report reflect these comments, because that report is going to be used as the basis for legislation to require Brockton to hook up to the NWRA. So the more you can make it complete, the better the legislators can understand it. You're right, you're scientists, you can't change the laws. The legislators do. We're begging for Brockton to cooperate and stop yelling at us. And we appreciate you coming, by the way. We really do. But at the end of the day, because they don't cooperate, I didn't mean to put it in, that was rude. Because Brockton doesn't cooperate.
When did they do, when?
Okay, all right.
Give me an example of not cooperating.
Paul can give you dozens. The Central Plymouth Water Commission have issued
I
orders.
want you to give me an example.
We have issued
That's what it
orders.
all is.
I'll answer right now, sir. We have issued orders through the Central Plymouth Water Commission on water management practices that they have a right to give, and they've been categorically ignored by Mr. Creed. Over and over and over again. And then we have sent correspondence to your board citing his lack of compliance with the Central Plymouth Water Commissioner's orders. I went to your commissioners meeting at the request with Pine and others to speak to your city council. And we sat there until 11:45 at night, only to be dismissed without giving comments. I can go on and on and on for the camera if you'd like. The point I'm making is, you may think that the diversion issue is not significant to the argument. It's going to be very significant to the debate on the House floor with respect to whether the 1964 law needs to be changed dramatically. So we encourage you to include all of the information that you found, not to favor this group or to favor Brockton. Just be scientists and tell the whole story.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you,
Thank you, Tom. Can I ask a question to Mr. Coulter? Mr. Coulter, if you went out and sought that $400,000 or $500,000, whatever it is, then we could solve this problem.
Okay, let me give you a dose of reality right now.
Okay.
In the budget this year, I got $50,000 for the Central Plymouth Water Commission, okay, to work on this issue. Last week, the governor cut it in his 9C cuts. So now you're saying I should just go out and get $500,000. The governor just cut $100 million out of the budget, including the money that was used to study this problem through the Central Plymouth Water Commission. So, we have to deal with reality here. You contact Governor Baker and say that you support, that Brockton supports $500,000 for this treatment, and we'll work together on it. I invite you to do that.
That's what I'd like to see.
And try to get
our legislators and
to get on board.
To get on board. And I will.
That's very good.
Believe me.
Yeah, I'd like to make
Can I ask a question? How come you didn't have a water ban this summer when everybody else did?
We had a water ban. We're still on a water ban.
It started in September.
Since, like, May.
Excuse me, the questions are really to direct the TMDL, not really to be towards one another. So if we could just, if you have further comments on this report and the analysis that was presented, please direct them to us. And, we allow, we got here at 6:30. This has been going on for a while. So I'm going to take a few more questions. And I can assure you, we've got all this written up and we will document the conversation.
I think this gentleman had to say that.
Yeah, I'm Gene, and I work for Senator Brady on here because he wasn't able to make it, so that's why I'm here. So speaking about that money, the government of Massachusetts has promised $125,000 for this situation. This is 2017. No one knows whether or not he's going to give it. And Senator Michael Wade had filed with us $100,000 for that situation. The government got it. And as of right now, our hope is that when they get back in January, hopefully we can get that $100,000. So just to speak about his support based on that situation, which I'm assuming that he's willing to do anything that he possibly do, to get that $100,000, which he believe will be a plus for that water situation. But just so you know, the government of Massachusetts promised $125,000. He promised it, but no one knows what he's going to do. Just to say what you said, he just vetoed a lot of stuff, and it is your responsibility to call the State House and make your arguments, and hopefully, they will listen to you. But that's why I'm here, and I listen to pretty much all the comments in depth. And when I go back to report to him, I'll do my best to explain the situation. And of course, excited about it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
No, my name's Don Howard. I'm a selectman and water commissioner in the town of Hanson. I came out of high school in 1957 and worked for Earl Simmons over in Handle. In 1964, I had worked, from a 57 to 64. I even drove a dump truck over in Silver Lake one summer because they were lowering the depth of the ground so that they could hold more capacity in Silver Lake. But anyhow, nobody thinks about water. Water's the most precious thing in life in here today. And I haven't heard anything in this about population increase. In 1964, when Silver Lake was used for water supply, I think Halifax, Hanson, Whitman, Brockton, they were all on Silver Lake, I believe. If I'm wrong, tell me, but I think they were. We have 4 wells in Hanson, we have our own water. But what I'm getting at, when all those towns were being used in 1964 to say 70 and so forth, the lake stayed pretty level because the population was low. But now the population is probably quadrupled what I've ever was back then. So you're using more water. If you take an ordinary well with a pump on it, you have a tank and a pump. The tank pumps the water out of the well. And if you use it long enough, the well goes dry. But you let it sit overnight, and it fills back up again, so that you got water the next day. To be honest with you, I'm not an engineer or scientist or anything. But I think Silver Lake works the same way. And Silver Lake, it's just my opinion, but I think it only produces about 4 million gallons a day. And if you keep pumping it and pumping it and pumping it, it's going to go down. They have Aquaria down in Dayton. If they used Aquaria, 3.5 million gallons a day, and they took only 4 million out of Silver Lake, and then they found another source like Stoughton's on WRA, if they took another 4 million gallons from WRA, they'd have their 11 million gallons. But it would give Silver Lake a time to kind of recoup itself. You understand what I'm saying? I do. The population is, I don't know, it must have quadrupled at least since 1964. But what I'm saying is, water is the most important thing on this earth today. And if we don't work together and try to cooperate and try to get the sources to work together, to try to make things work, we're going to be out of water.
Amen.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don. Go next.
Well, thank you. Following up on what Don is saying, and back to the comment that I think Mr. Matson was talking about the law. The law only allows Brockton really to take that 4 million out of Silver Lake, because the registrations relied on 6.5 million coming out of Monponsett Pond. So if you reduce the amount that's coming out of Monponsett Pond, you have to reduce the withdrawal from Silver Lake by the city of Brockton. And the last ACO, as I recall, required a comprehensive water management plan, which you haven't approved yet, and I'm glad you haven't, because the city hasn't told you how it's going to use Aquaria. Now we know. We're going to use Aquaria only if we can make them break our contract, so that we don't have to use Aquaria anymore. And that's not why so many people and money and effort was spent to put Dayton online. It was to give Brockton the additional water supply. Then in the 80s, the department and EEA and the state and Army Corps and EPA and U.S. Geological, they all recognized the city of Brockton needed more water, mostly because of what Don was saying, But the city of Brockton lost 1 billion gallons of water last year. Gone. 30% gone. Has the department asked them where the hell that water went? We know it's killing the mussels in Silver Lake to just lose it. The water's not going in from Monponsett Pond like it is intended to do under the registrations, and that was the law that gave them the right to make those diversions. If you, because of the current condition in Monponsett Pond, reduce that amount, which I think you should. Personally, I don't think they should be diverting Monponsett Pond into Silver Lake at all, nor do I think they should be diverting Furnace Pond into Silver Lake at all, because I think it's a detriment to the lake. As you point out in your TMDL, it's created a Category 5 out of the Jones River. The weeds in Silver Lake, Don, you talk about, or somebody was talking about the clarity of Monponsett Pond. I moved there in '75 to Silver Lake, crystal clear. Not anymore. Not anymore. And it's because of the department not enacting the laws the way they were intended to be enacted. You're interpreting them as a way of buffering it, because I understand the city of Brockton is tough to deal with. They have tough times in the city. I get it. I'm not beating up on them. I want to solve their problem. But it's not turning your back on the resources that are down here. You have to step up, and really, crank up that new ACO so that it does what we all need the city to do. We want to help them get a decent supply of water.
Thank you. Thanks, Don.
Are there any other questions? Well, this has been extremely helpful to hear from you guys directly, all your thoughts, and we'll be taking this into consideration and developing responses to next steps. And I want to thank everybody for being here.
Thank you.